Oh, so we've been looking at Sparta. Command the fate of an empire. You can see that. This is sort of a war game with Euro-ish mechanisms and components, which came out on Kickstarter. They were kind enough to send me sort of the deluxe version that you get from the Kickstarter, which, you know, it's real nice. And it's one of the things about Kickstarter is that I think it attracts the people who want those really superb components. Component-wise, almost everything is fantastic. I had one little gripe on the cards. But you've got these, which there's wooden pieces for everything except the things that I've already popped out, which is kind of a strange omission. I don't know why that's the case. But, you know, in sort of the most basic version, you're fine. You've got a playable game with good quality cardboard components. The player's aids are useful. I didn't look at the bot. Hidden behind here, there's a solo bot, but there's basically two copies of the player aid in here. This is the front side, this is the back side, and then the bot sandwiched in between. I wanted to keep this because it keeps me from messing up. It's like this neat little plastic thing that seals it up. It keeps me from messing things up. I did open it to make sure that I had everything that I needed on those two pages. The board itself, it's got this real nice smoothness to it. Modern boards, a lot of them are coming out like this. They fold nicely. They feel like they're fairly solid. Like they're not going to just break apart like some of the earlier fold-em-up boards. Think about your Avalon Hill. The worst for me was Struggle of Nations, which just broke into pieces. But Civilization and stuff like that had kind of a tendency to warp and everything. These don't seem like they do. I've pulled games with the same quality board out. I'm thinking Tammany Hall came with the same kind of quality, and they hold up. These nice little player, I don't know, tracking sheets. One of the more deluxe items that I just didn't find myself using was the little plastic minis. I found there are little wooden army pieces with numbers on them that I found a lot more useful to me than trying to use the military figures and trying to match them to the images. That was just too much for me. They're pretty minis, but you know, my arm would bump them if I played with them, etc. Card quality, generally very good. The one gripe that I had about the cards is this. In some places, it tells you you can do something in a specific city. And my memory of the cities isn't very good. You know, I know the big ones, but I don't necessarily know all of the cities of the ancient Greek world. And some of them I would have to hunt down. It would have been helpful. There's little symbols that are associated with the regions. And they're on the map here. And this is used elsewhere. Trying to remember where it was. I know I ran into it somewhere. Ah, yes. On these components. The little symbols, the Attica symbol is this little blue star, for example. They're on the military units. It would have been useful to put it in the cards as sort of a visual clue as to where a specific city was. It's a minor thing. There aren't a hell of a lot of cities. You don't have to work too hard to find them. Each region in the game has its own little placard as well, which tells you what resources you get out of it, and that can help you determine who's assigned where. Again, the deluxe, well, actually, I think all versions come with wooden cubes and discs for control and influence, but the wooden soldier pieces, yeah, those also come in all versions. One of the fanciest things is the nice metal money that comes with it. You got individual leaders, each have their own little placards. I found the leaders, and I don't think this has anything to do with the component quality, but I found the leaders kind of a pain to keep track of. However you want to look at that. Card quality, again, very, very good. We've got more and more leaders, specialized dice for the game, etc. The play of the game largely the play of the game in a lot of ways reminds me of some of those stripped down CDGs in terms of what you can actually do on each turn. Now, you've got a dichotomy. It was designed originally as a CDG and then transformed into this version after many, many stops along the way. And the cards themselves are just really events. They might be usable by either player. They might also favor one player over the other, and they're time differentiated. So in each scenario, you play with a different deck of cards, basically, one that's selected for that scenario. There are some cards that are common that I think show up in all of the scenarios, basically. I didn't really check that because what happens is you end up filling out the deck, just following this compendium of what you're supposed to put where and how. Now, what that means is the way the play of the game works is basically you have to play a card each turn if you have one. You get to play your turn without a card. Again, a little twist on the CG thing. You don't have any real. You don't have a choice between different types of actions with the card. Some cards do. Baked into their event is something like do this or that. It's often not a choice though. It's often a matter of if you have favor, you must do X. If you don't, you must do Y. And Y may or may not, it's not necessarily the case that you would rather spend the favor to do something. So you're constantly trying to manipulate the order of the play of your cards to get the best advantage that you can at the lowest cost. So in some cases it's like, yeah, this card doesn't really help me to pay the favor to get the bigger result. So let me try to manipulate, when I play it, etc. So that's one aspect of it. Cards can influence each other. So one card could get you something that gets you a bonus for another card, etc. But for the actual play of the game, outside of this event card aspect, you're basically doing actions which are almost always counterable by the other player. And that reminds me a lot, again, of some of these most stripped down CDGs. And for those, I'm talking about 13 Days as an example. The one that is the most stripped down that I can think of was 1955, which was kind of a spying type thing. Those tended to be uninteresting to me. I felt like pretty much whatever you did with the card, in a way you could argue 1955 isn't a CDG because it doesn't even have events. I don't remember. 13 Days I think had events built into it, but not absolutely certain. But anyway, essentially whatever you did in these games, the opponent might want to just prevent you from gaining your advantage from it. And they could do that. They could constantly block whatever you're trying to do, which is, I think, generally kind of uninteresting. But in this game, I didn't find myself as, I don't know, feeling as restricted as I did in some of those other games. Now let's take a look at, I really ought to get these counters off the counter sheet. The box is a little over full. So the way the turn actually operates, right? Let's look at the broader turn sequence, and then we'll look into the individual player turns within that. The first thing that happens in each turn is you basically assess the board, see who gets what in terms of assets and money, and you kind of reset the game state, right? And you reset the game state by looking, hey, how strong should the armies be on the strength track? And that's just sort of a mechanical type aspect. It is affected by your board state. And it's affected by how strong you were the turn before at the end of the turn, how much damage you took. Ships, again, you reassess the naval strength, and the way you do that is essentially paying money, the money that you got from that first assessment area. Then you're allowed to pay some additional money to bring unit assets back that you had lost over the course of the last turn or earlier, perhaps. Then there's a little bit of cleanup. Raids go away. Raids are going to affect your control of regions and therefore your income and asset capabilities. But they only last one turn, one full turn. And then everybody gets a handful of 6 action cards. They get to play their turns. And then you go to the Olympic Games, which there's 2 ways of doing it. Both of them are basically, you assess who has the best advantages for something. And in the basic game, you roll dice. In the optional version of it, you assess each thing individually. It gives cubes. Whoever draws the most of their cubes out of a 3-cube draw from a cup gets the bonus. But here's the thing. The results from those 2 are different. The basic game results are pretty much the winner of the Olympics gets a little bit of an advantage, but it's very tiny. It's basically a choice between a favor or a talent when it comes down to it. With the more advanced version, or the optional version of it, it actually provides a nice little balancing feature or catch-up mechanism. The person who's doing the worst, in both cases, gets the advantage, but in the optional Olympic version, they end up getting more coinage out of the situation, as well as probably getting the favor. Okay. For the play of your own turn, the first thing you do is, if you have any forces that are sitting out there, they're from the last action impulse that you took, they're allowed to conduct a raid. And a raid gets you some cash, and it negates that space for control purposes and all the goodies that come with control for the next turn, unless something obviates the raid. Then you must play an action card if you have one. Now, you also have the option of spending 2 favor, which is a big cost in the game, to get rid of an action card. And that's important because there are action cards which just benefit your opponent and can be pretty potent. Now, you don't get rid of it forever. You throw it in the discard pile, which means it might come back out. Then if you have built any hoplites or triremes, any forces in your prior impulse, they get deployed on the board. You must do this. You can't withhold them. Once you make the choice to pay and build a force, it has to go out. Then you're allowed to pay cash to raise new forces that you may want to use on your next impulse. Then if you are on the board still, if you did raids and chose to stay there, you may pay $2 to prosecute a siege of that location. Now, if you did stay, you were sieging the location. And the siege is done with a simple roll of dice. You get more dice. You basically get one die, and then situations can improve or reduce that. The dice in this game are, I think there's like 4 successes, a failure. I don't know. No, it can't be that good. There's 1, 2, 3 successes, 1 failure, and 2 blanks on each die. Okay? And so, obviously, you're looking for successes. They're the most likely thing. But if you get to roll more than 1 die, you get multiples. You're more likely to get successes. Also, when you're doing sieges, you may need more than 1 success in order to completely reduce the city. Failures cause you hits on your army strength, which is going to affect your capability to do battles. And yeah, you have to pay money to do this. If you wipe out the entirety of the city, of the influence in the city, you end up taking that city over from the siege in general. And you get another stockpile of cash for having captured the city. And also you get the control of that city for the next assessment phase, assuming nothing happens in between. But here's the thing. Remember I told you that your opponent can pretty much always stop you at whatever you're up to? Let me swap batteries. In nearly every case, if you send a force out to go do something during your deploy phase, it doesn't get to raid or prosecute a siege until your next turn. If your opponent was already building a force of the same type, which of course they're going to do if they're trying to counter you, they can send that force out to conduct a battle against you. And barring some leader effects, some battle card effects, etc., there are some little things that allow you to twist everything in the game. But barring those, you're able to, if you fight the battle, win or lose, drive the opponent away. So they don't get to do whatever it was they were attempting to do, which is raiding, sieging, etc. Which means most of the actions that you're taking that are not just event cards, right? Or that aren't manipulated by, some battle card, some event card, whatever, some leader capability, are just going to end up being a wash. Is there some effect? Yeah. If you manage to win the battle, you cause more damage to the opponent, and you also get a favor. And favors are very valuable, okay? They are the little engine that makes those event cards work harder for you, among other things. And 2 of them allow you to get rid of an event card that you really don't want to play. The battle itself is determined by what assets you have. And for naval battles, there's just naval assets. For land battles, there's 3 different types of military assets. They're compared for each, and whoever has the advantage in any given one gets a point towards winning the battle, a battle point. The home team advantage, if you're in territory that you controlled, back from the assessment phase, or if it's been reassessed, which is also possible through some cards and whatnot. It's worth a point. And then whoever has the better strength for that kind of thing, either land strength or naval strength, gets a point. On top of that, you've got this battle card mechanism. The battle cards can generate changes in assets and possibly control. Other kind of features can be changed. They can also just generate battle points for you. They can also do kind of random strategic stuff. Okay? They can allow you to add forces to your assets, etc. And the battle cards are kind of interesting. When you build a force, you're allowed to buy a battle card for a couple bucks. But at the beginning of any battle, if you have 2 or less cards, you get a free card. So you kind of don't want to have too many. And unless you have a lot too many, you're only allowed 6 total at any given time. Otherwise, you draw and discard if you get an additional one. In one of the scenarios, the Theban player gets a free battle card every full turn, which is kind of a needed ability. Those battle cards are not limited, so they don't feel the same as, say, the battle cards in Hannibal or in We the People, right? They're more part of your overall strategy. You're playing them. You're playing your turn with an eye towards what those battle cards can do for you. They might help you just win a battle, and it's usually through kind of what feel like less than tactical. They don't feel like tactical means for the most part. They're quite often things like you're able to, build additional troops and purchase them and bring them into play. Or you're able to reduce an opponent's troops, which might be part of the battlefield situation. Sometimes they involve political stuff instead of just military stuff. Like you get influence in a city or something like that. So sometimes they just give you money. They're just like all these, a mishmash of capabilities that you have to put into your full strategic planning. And I really kind of like that. I usually hate battle cards. In this game, I find I really like what they're doing because they combine in with the playthrough. Now, I can understand people have kind of a disagreement with like calling that battle cards or whatever, because they're more than that. They are part of your overall strategic plan. But they're a part that you can only play within a battle, okay, for whatever reason. And that's where it gets hand-wavy, is how come I got to fight a battle for this to happen? Well, sometimes a battle has an impact, right? The fact that you're actually willing to go out and engage. All right, I'm going to grab some coffee and another pipe, and I'll be back for some more words about this. So, the game is designed as basically a series of scenarios, which to one level you could just play as disconnected little competitive games. And I think that's really what the heart of it was designed as, is to play a single scenario and focus on it that way. And as such, I find the gameplay to be kind of exciting, engaging. Sometimes it's very hard to make your decision at the beginning of any given game turn because you have 6 of these action cards, and the interactions and interplay between them becomes more and more difficult. It's sometimes hard to decide where you want to focus and what you want to do. As the turn plays out, though, you find yourself more and more, you have more and more limited choices because you've already set things in motion, and it becomes much easier to make your decisions. However you want to take that, like, I think most people kind of like making hard decisions. I'm kind of an outlier there. I like the decisions to be obvious to me somehow. I don't know. And it's kind of cool because I like them to be obvious to me, but I often find that other people find difficulty in making the decisions that I find obvious. And on the opposite side of things, I will struggle and just, be miserable trying to figure something out. And other people are like, yep, and they just find something and it works, and I don't understand what's going on. Just different ways brains work. But anyway, I found that even though I had to make some choices and whatnot, I enjoyed the choices that I was making there. One thing to warn you, though, is the game does have a significant luck factor. Not so much from the dice, they don't tend to do much, but rather from the hand of cards that you get each time. There's not a lot of mitigation of this. It's quite possible that you can get screwed pretty heavily by the cards that come out, the order they come out in, whatever, in any given deck situation. It's also quite possible that you can, fuck up and make your situation terrible. And this is one thing that I found with the scenarios. They tend to have a tipping point, okay, where really bad luck or a really bad mistake or a combination of these things can make the game almost unwinnable. And I'm not talking about just like bad play throughout or whatever. I'm just talking about a couple of cards, whatever, in the wrong order, a couple of bad play choices. They can really screw you over. Now, obviously, if your opponent's making bad choices or getting bad luck at the same time, it's not gonna be that big a deal. It balances out, right? But there's enough luck that it's a fair chance and enough possibility to screw up that there's a fair chance that one player or the other will hit that tipping point, from which it is really hard to come back. Okay, which is to say, you need a much more extreme set of luck and mistakes to undo that tipping point. Is that a bad thing? I don't know. It means that, like in my final scenario that I played of the game, and I didn't play the last of the possible scenarios, simply because I've played enough of this at this point, like all at once. I hit that tipping point fairly early in that scenario, and didn't see doing the last third of the scenario, right? But that happens. There are plenty of games where it's like, yeah, it's obvious who's going to win this. Can we quit? Do we really need to play it out? And the fact that an opponent can counter what you're trying to do very easily makes it hard to catch up, right? So that's kind of part of what's going on in it. It's one reason I like the Olympic rules, is that they are a little bit of a catch-up mechanism. So if one player is running away with it, the other player does continue to get a decent income off the Olympics. It may not be historically accurate that you'd get that much military cash from the Olympics, but I do like it as a game mechanism, and because the game has this tendency to tip over and be a runaway situation. I think probably the basic Olympics is probably more historically accurate. I just don't think the Olympics should have that big an effect. But anyway, the truth, though, is that the Peloponnesian Wars tended to be these long stalemate situations that didn't just break open all at once, right at the beginning or whatever. So in order to, maybe as a design for effect type thing, you can make the argument that, yeah, sure, the Olympics didn't have that big an effect, but the game is already skewing things too much towards the side that's in the lead continuing to snowball into a greater and greater lead. So, yeah, 6 on one hand, half a dozen on the other, right? All right. Now, the game also has a campaign framework around it. And of course, being who I am, I'm like, let's play the biggest campaign we can. There's these things that link the First Peloponnesian and Second Peloponnesian War together, and something that links the Second Peloponnesian War with the Theban-Sparta Wars together. And then there's one final scenario that just is way, way out of time. There's basically 15 years between each of these little episodic scenarios, right? And probably the most accurate historical thing you can do is just play each scenario as itself. But of course, I want to do something where what I do in one scenario has some influence on the next. And what I found with this was that tipping point situation, that capability for one player to get an advantage too early, played into the campaign game. And the choices that were made in the campaign game were to keep the situation approximately as balanced as it was. So if one player's significantly in the lead at the end of one scenario, they would be significantly in the lead at the beginning of the next scenario. There is some perturbation to it, not as much as there would have been historically. Notably, historically what tended to happen was one side would get a major advantage and a truce would sort of come about. And during the course of that truce, the side that had the major advantage would overplay their hand and end up disabusing all their allies and turning them against them. And, if you take a look, the First Peloponnesian War, Athens was in the lead after it and was able to get into a very positive situation, which in the game would have probably been past the tipping point and would mean they just win the whole campaign. But the reality was different. During that peace period, Athens overplayed their hand and ended up really pissing off a lot of members of the Delian League. There were revolts and whatnot. Sparta comes back and rather massively defeats the Athenians, and, captures the city, tears down the walls, etc., and forces them to to accept Spartan overlordship. But then what happens? Well, in the next transition period, Sparta overplays their hand, and their allies, Thebes and Corinth, turn against them and become the nucleus of a new anti-Spartan coalition. And pretty much beat them. Not as massively as Sparta beat Athens, but at least from what I remember. Anyway, the game does not do that. It does not make that interwar period particularly a penalty on the leader. And that serves two problems. One is, it's not historical. Two is, that next scenario in your campaign framework, if one side was massively ahead over the other, it's just horrible. It's already past the tipping point when you start it. You might as well quit. The only way the game is any good, in my opinion at least, at that point, the only way the campaign is of any interest, either in terms of competitive quality, but also there's a sameness to the play, there's the ability to block and everything like that, that makes it so that it's really an uninteresting play if you're past that tipping point. So there's not a lot of great story happening anymore at that point. Which means, look, most scenarios will hit a tipping point at some point during the scenario. One side or the other is going to probably win. It's just a matter of the luck, the skill, whatever. It's unlikely, I think, for games to, at least in what little experience I have, for games to be really tightly contested to the end of any given scenario. Which means these campaign extensions probably are no fun no matter what. Like, I would say 3/4 of the time, they're not going to be any fun. You're just not going to want to do it. And I would prefer to have something that penalizes the lead player more. Now, the structure that the game gave was, look, you want to win the whole campaign to maintain some sort of, the competitive advantage that you get from coming out ahead in one scenario. The decision was made to keep things kind of more balanced. Whether that's historical or not, obviously, it's not. But I also think that it doesn't serve a good gameplay structure. I tried fiddling around to come up with, very naively, just can I fiddle around and come up with something? I think I was kind of close to something that would have worked. But the designer took some of my words to heart, and I think maybe coming up with an optional, campaign that'll work a little differently. And maybe just something that'll be online, and it won't be massive amounts of rules changes or whatever. It basically takes more away from the leader, but gives them campaign victory points for the things that they lost, so that you assess the whole campaign over the scenarios that you won. And it's not just a hey, whoever wins the last one wins, but it's also not a win 2 out of 3 or something like that. What he was fiddling around with looked interesting to me, and I'm sure, with the amount of focus that he can put as opposed to my scattershot methods of getting to anything, I'm sure he can come up with something that would please me a great deal more. So that's actually probably a minor concern about it. The only problem, of course, with that is that you still have to perhaps play a scenario. In order to play the campaign, you have to play a scenario beyond where it's necessarily particularly fun, but at least you'll be getting another scenario that, you'll have a better balanced situation coming out of it. Anyway, overall, I enjoyed it. The components are really, really nice. There's no question about that. The boxing is. It's got that smoothness that the board does too, and I'm glad I took a look at this. I don't do a lot of. I'm trying to stay away from new games in general, and I don't want to do things that are just review copies because they're review copies anymore. But this one, I had everything this designer's done, I've been interested in, and seen some intriguing ideas, different plays on the CDG mechanisms and whatnot. And with this one, it's definitely something new and different. I think this is a pretty strong entry, even if you wash away the campaign game as written. But I also think that it would be not difficult to come up. It was harder than I could do on the fly, like I did with some things, like whatever. I'm trying to remember that I mentioned it in another one, the Japanese game that I was able to fiddle with and fix on the fly on the first play. But this. I had to understand what the balancing effects are. There's also modifiers to the scenarios. If you're not playing the campaign game, there's different starting cards that you can use that impact the scenarios, and those could actually be worked into the campaign game in a very good way, I think. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for tinkering with this game, especially if you're looking at the campaign game, to try to come up with something that's more fun. It's not a very long game. I know I spent forever playing it. That's just the way I am. I'm slow. But that has to do with me not playing it straight through. You know, you're looking at like, I guess 1.5 to 3 hour scenarios, which is actually a pretty comfortable time, you know. If you get together with a buddy after work or whatever, that's a good amount of time to play a game. As opposed to most of what I do. All right. Anyway, I definitely recommend this as something of interest. You know, if you're interested in that kind of Whirro-ish modification to the CDG element, and of course the subject matter too, which is part of it for me.